Welcome to the SaaS Revolution Show, a podcast by SaaStock. Here we interview SaaS founders from around the world who've been there and done that, as they share the ins and outs of how they built their businesses, their operations, their path to securing investment, and more. Our mission with the podcast is to help you, the founder, learn how to scale your SaaS, maintain your well-being, and navigate the complexities of this ever-changing industry. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, and together we'll explore the good, the bad, and the ugly in the journey to SaaS success.
Welcome back to the SaaS Revolution Show. I'm your host, Alex Theuma, CEO and founder of SaaStock and general partner at Back Future Ventures as well. And really delighted to be joined today by Abakar Saidov, who's the co-founder and CEO at Beamery. How are you doing, Abakar?
Doing great. Really excited to be here, Alex, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to have you on the podcast. You're in London at the moment?
I am, yeah. London's been back home actually since 2018. I had a few stints in the US, in New York when we started the business, and then in San Francisco come in 2017-18, but decided this is the best city in the world, so I'm back here.
Good to know. I've been based in the UK for most of my life. I've had a stint. I lived in Rio for a year, but this was like before I started my career as such, and I wouldn't call traveling around Asia living abroad, but you kind of are. It's more like partying abroad. And but always lived in the UK, and then always thinking the grass is greener, and like, should we move to Barcelona? Should I move to Austin? And always thinking about these things. But there is a lot to be said. Like, whilst I go to like New York, and like in the 2 days that I'm there, I'm often feeling, I could live here. This is great energy, and so on. I think ultimately, I like deep down anyway, I'm happy here. Used to the culture. It is. There are a lot of great things about UK and London, and probably will be the case that I'll remain here. Sometimes the weather, is the only thing, but I do like the seasons. But yeah, no, it's all good. And you're like, you have a London office. Is everybody in the office, back at the office, or are you hybrid? Like, how does that look?
It's a bit mixed. So I mentioned obviously we started the business, actually, my co-founder and I, right at the beginning, we go into this accelerator program in New York called AngelPad. So kind of 3 months into the business, we relocated to the US. We're out there for about 9 months. And then part of our story was we were trying to raise money, that early stage seed round, and completely failed. Didn't get any investors, nothing in the US, and kind of came back to the UK and were essentially doing kind of a last ditch effort, kind of friends and family, former colleagues, etc., and managed to kind of scrape together a little bit of money. And we're like, well, we're back in the UK now, might as well do it here. And that was kind of reinforced by, our maybe personal story of when, my parents moved to the UK, and one of the founding elements of Beamery was around, the mission we have is creating equal access to work. And part of that was to do with, a lot of people who have great qualifications, from other countries come to the UK, and my parents included, and those qualifications don't get recognized. So how do you kind of change that perspective of if talent's equally distributed, well, opportunity isn't? And so actually building a UK headquartered international business became kind of a very kind of big sticking point for what we wanted to achieve. And so, yes, we have almost all of our engineering team in the UK, most of them in London. We've actually got a small team over in Germany, in Berlin. And then a lot of our go-to-market team is actually in the US, because a lot of our target customers are, large multinational organizations, Global 2000. Many of them are US headquartered. And so we actually have our kind of commercial teams largely in the US, all over the place. And so we actually have, we don't have offices in the US, but we have a few kind of centers of gravity, places like Austin, New York, etc. But in the UK, it's mostly London.
A couple of things I want to touch on there. So you mentioned that after doing AngelPad in New York, you tried to raise, did you say seed round?
Yeah.
raise seed round, but it failed.
Mm-hmm.
What was the feedback there, or like what was I guess kind of the commonality is to like people saying, okay, you're not investable like now, and then maybe like what changed, because obviously now you are on this venture path, right, and you've got some great top tier VCs, that have led your rounds. So yeah, would love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd summarize the original feedback in two parts. I think one is about you don't get to choose the timing of what else is happening in the market. And what we didn't fully appreciate is, when we were starting our business, which is ultimately in kind of HR technology, was also a time when a bunch of investors lost a ton of money on the previous generation of HR technology companies. And basically the perspective was, hey, the only companies that are doing anything in HR technology that have not lost money are LinkedIn and Workday, and everyone else has imploded. So, quote unquote, we're not touching this space again, which meant that a lot of people were kind of not interested in this space at all. And the other was kind of probably more personal, as a bit of a punch in the stomach. And I'll quote one investor that shall remain nameless from a tier 1 VC firm who listened to my brother's pitch for 40 minutes without saying anything, then leant back in his chair and said, here's what I don't get. You guys aren't computer scientists from Stanford. You're not, former employees at Google or PeopleSoft. What are two guys, whose last job was on Wall Street starting a software company? You guys should just go home. Those were his words. And, and to some people, that's maybe disappointment. To the two of us, it was fire in the belly to go, we will prove you wrong. And we have. But good. I think to me, it was very much you see the fact that as much as you look at, call them unicorn founders, whatever, most successful entrepreneurs are not fitting a pattern of went to Stanford, worked at Google. But that pattern feels very comforting to invest in.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I've definitely seen that. And I'm only early into my, journey of VC and, kind of learning all the time. But I guess kind of with the exposure, like having run SaaStock for 9 years, you definitely see that. And I can remember, but probably won't name, a lot of companies where it's like, okay, well, this founder, they're ex-Google. Okay, like how do we write them a check, right? But some of the best founders that I've seen and, spoken to have actually, come from nothing but like hard work, right? And they have something, inherent where you can see, this founder is just going to make it happen. They're going to run through walls, right? And they've got like the real characteristics needed to kind of make this a success along, with other things. So it certainly shouldn't be, but, just looking at certain logos, right, and brands there. But I still do see it. And even like on our side, my colleague, right, he'll like sometimes, come to me, oh, look, we've got a like, new deal sort of source, and they're Stanford, MIT, and, there's a bit of excitement, or, there's Andreessen Horowitz Scout, on the cap table or something like that. But, for me, okay, it's interesting, but it's certainly not these are not the decision-making criteria that we take to make an investment or not.
Because I do a bunch of angel investing now too, and friends who are starting companies, or kind of when folks are saying kind of what do you look for, lots of people have good ideas, and that's a well-known tribe. I think probably the number one quality is kind of what you just said earlier. It's grit. It's how long can you endure pain? Because a lot of this is just hitting your head against many brick walls continuously. Now, there's a balance around stubbornly hitting a wall that's the wrong wall is not the right approach. So it's the combination of ingenuity, not being stuck on kind of one idea all the time, but the tolerance for pain has to be high. And so it's like, how has somebody demonstrated that they have a high tolerance for pain? And I remember reading an article recently where in the kind of post-OpenAI wave, there's a whole bunch of other splinter companies that were funded, for the second engineer, the third engineer that worked on this model, that model. Almost all of them have imploded within the first 12 months. Founder conflict. Turns out it's hard to start a company. Who knew?
It's very hard. It's very hard. And I know with 9 years of scars, and actually, like, while some years have been easier than others, it also, I mean, there's just never a point where it is easy, right? Like, I might have an easier day or an easier week, but like it doesn't necessarily, get easier. And as you move from, let's say survival, like, the traction stage, but then you go to growth and then you go to scaling. I mean, arguably, it could just be getting harder and harder. And you have to be a certain type of person, as you say, to have the grit to resist the pain, the daily pain, to make the sacrifices. And I know, like, I had a conversation at SaaStock with a CEO of a unicorn company, and he's got a family. He moved his family to Europe. He's got 2 teenage boys. And he has only been home like 45 days this year, right? And for me, I was like, I've got 2 kids, so I was like, I just couldn't do that. And I've sort of like, okay, I've made my choices. I'm not on the venture path, in terms of, having a company that's venture backed and scaling up. But, I've sort of made my choice that actually, like, okay, I've got to work hard, but I also need, I want to have that balance of having family life. But I think some, we'll have to choose a little bit of sacrifice, right, in order to get to where they need to get to. I mean, what about that with yourself, like, in terms of sacrifices that you have to make, right? And like, how that affects you, in your personal life or family life?
Yeah, I think it's the question I think everyone needs to answer for themselves is, what does your steady state look like? And that changes a little bit, but I think one of the luxuries, I think, of being, a founder or a CEO is you get to choose the hours you work. As in, for example, I also have 2 kids, they're young kids, and I've discovered that my steady state, where maybe I'm at 80% capacity, which I can maintain forever, is around, 12, maybe 13 hours a day. And for some people, this is like, oh, this is too much. I'm like, for me, I've been doing this for over a decade. I know I can do 12 to 14 hours a day, no problem, 5 days a week, etc. And you can then flex that, right? If you can flex that up, work really long hours, flex it down. And so that's kind of one question. And that's not a kind of a moment of pride or something else. And, I love working long hours. But what you get to do is to choose which hours. So, for example, for me, the best times I find to spend with the kids is before school, after school, right? And so 6 to 8 a.m., 6 to 8 p.m. before they go to bed. And so for me, that's sacrosanct. And making sure I'm home for those hours, I spend the time with them, because outside of that, like, they're not home. And also running a US business means that after 8 p.m., I can do a bunch of the US stuff. And so I find that actually within that context, I'm much luckier than if, for example, I was, at a professional services firm where a client calls you at 6 and you have to take the call. And so I feel like one is quantity and one is control. And I feel like I have a lot of control, which I think is really great. And I think actually having kids made me very deliberate about it, because it's so easy to just keep working in the office and doing all these things. And so I think breaking up the day became really powerful. I think travel is a different one, where I think post-COVID, I think I put a high premium on travel. And for me, there's only a couple of reasons to travel. First and foremost, it's seeing customers. And so I try and do that in blocks. So for example, probably the difference in my travel patterns has gone pre-kids. I'd probably do like a couple of weeks in the US and come back. Now I don't want to miss the weekends at home. So I'd probably rather do like out Monday, back Friday. And but you want to make sure you pack as much into that piece as possible rather than going every couple of weeks. So maybe I'll go to the US once a quarter, do Europe maybe a bit more frequently than that. And the other reason is obviously to see your partners, see your your team. And so we budget a lot of team travel to London as well. So we do, for example, next week we have our senior leadership summit where, the folks below the exec team, so a larger group, come to London once a year. We do a couple of days of workshops, strategy building, etc. And so, by having a team that's kind of hybrid, where some are remote, some are together, you need to actually spend to bring people together, because there's nothing that substitutes that level of contact. But I think, I feel very much, I didn't really think about not having enough time. I think it's about prioritizing time. So maybe I'll give another example. I have it's not really a rule, but like I'm always an internal processing of when somebody says, hey, do you want to go to this conference or do you want to go to this event? And I say, is it 1 degree of separation from customers, revenue, partners? Because if it's not, then what's the point? And so I think you put a lot of premium on time where, like, for example, we have a Workday event, and Workday is a partner in Amsterdam. It's like, well, we're going to meet customers there. They're our partner, et cetera. That makes sense. And so I think that you have to, as the companies get bigger, et cetera, every CEO talks about where you spend your time matters. And I feel like it's very easy for your time to be filled with lots of things. And I kind of noticed this probably the most after our Series A round, where until then you're kind of like heads down, nobody knows who you are, and your calendar it's very much like a builder's calendar, right? Like your heads down working. Post Series A, you get a bit on the map, and just like inbound stuff starts coming in. People want on your diary, and I feel like you basically got to play defense a lot, and at some point, having a great EA that can help you play defense. And for the longest time, I resisted. I'm like, it sounds pompous. Having an assistant, I can manage my own calendar, etc. So I probably waited way longer than I should have done to go do that. But I find that element of it's very easy to lose control of your calendar because everyone wants on it.
I guess a couple of things there. Like on my side, I had a personal assistant, and probably for about sort of 2 years, and then sort of parted ways this year. And now I've found, like two things on that. One, I'm doing a lot of tasks that are consuming like a lot of time, and I kind of think, oh, like I wish I had my assistant back, or an assistant. And then secondly, as you say, just around the calendar time now, like I do have like certain blocks in my calendar where. And I also, vocally, share this within the business that, look, I want mornings to be meetings free. I want to do deep work, right? I only want to do meetings in the afternoon. But it seems like, and maybe it is getting a little bit better, but, no matter how many times I send the messages, like meetings just get thrown in the morning, or they sort of creep in, at lunchtime, in the afternoon and throughout. And obviously, a lot, like as a CEO and founder, a lot of your time is wanted and, demanded by the team, and you've got to make a lot of decisions and be in, a lot of the details. But often it does get like out of control. And I guess obviously one area where a personal assistant, can help if, if you have that ruthlessness, and perhaps when you don't have that, and you say it, you share it, you're just still, the behaviors are not quite happening as to, how you want them, and it makes things very difficult. So I guess from my experience, I definitely perhaps didn't recognize as much the value of a personal assistant when I had it, and then when I didn't have it, then you sort of really understand like the importance there.
I mean, well, one of the things I do once a quarter is delete every meeting in my calendar every internal meeting, let's say, to see what would I re-add. Because I think a lot of things, especially recurring things, stay in there and are kind of habitual. And so you almost play not just the theoretical, but the practical exercises. If I cancelled everything, who's going to come shout and say that they actually need to meet with me? And it's a very cathartic exercise, because you realize that like usually half the stuff doesn't need to be there anymore. And the second piece is, when people, we don't have to dive into meeting etiquette a lot, but when people put stuff on your calendar, what a really great EA can do is ask the question, what context do you need to not have that person in the meeting? And it might be just, for example, I remember one distinctly. It was my CRO and my GC wanting my opinion on a particular contract we were negotiating. And when that question was asked, they said, well, we want to know risk appetite, because if you have low risk, we should do this. If you have high risk, you should do this. And I was like, high. And they're like, cool, we don't need to meet. Right. And so the reality is a lot of these things, as you say, they require an opinion or an input, but that is a 30-second exercise, not a 30-minute exercise.
Looking at yourself as you scaled Beamery and your role as a founder and CEO, if we take maybe like the last 2 years, how are you and where are you like spending your time and the focus and thinking then about where you want to get to? Like what are you doing, around that?
It's a journey. I think that one of the things I try to do is, again, usually every quarter, is kind of draw a pie chart of where am I spending my time, where would I like to spend my time. And I think in the early days, you have no customers, you have no product. So really where you should be spending your time is in front of people trying to figure out, am I building the right thing? Am I thinking through the right thing? So you almost go to like 100% customer facing. And I'm not a software engineer. So for me, I spent a lot of time more on the products, the wireframing, working with our team and my brother. My brother, by the way, is the product genius behind Beamery. And so what ends up happening is you kind of oscillate to a little bit less stuff customer facing, but you're still the person selling everything. I sold, the first, several dozen deals in the company, and then you start professionalizing it, you start hiring salespeople, etc. And I noticed, many years in, that we were able to do all of these things and sign, $1 million plus deals where I didn't need to be in the room at all. And so what starts happening is it's not that the team wants to exclude you, is that they can actually succeed without you. And then you and at the same time, the thing that happens is there are a bunch of internal stuff starts coming up. Like you need to do, you're a bigger company, you need to do strategy, planning, you need to think about culture, you need to think about, HR topics, financial topics, investor topics. And so the time gets sucked into things that are nothing to do with customers. And you almost have to fight it, where you're like, well, it depends on kind of what kind of leader you want to be. For me, for a very long time, we were a product-centric company. And, everyone says, oh, customer centricity is important. I think the DNA comes from different places, and often DNA comes from the top. And both me and my co-founder, we love product. We think about product a lot. And so you end up having a lot of that kind of DNA embedded. And which means that unless you refocus your energy, and so, for example, my co-founder spends a lot of time with clients, I realized that unless that was intentional, it just wouldn't happen organically. And so one of the things I started doing is saying, I want to see, maybe spend 25% of my time every week in front of customers, in front of prospects. What you get as an interesting reaction is people panic a little bit. They kind of go, well, where should we insert you? Because, if you come in too early, then, the salesperson's like, well, I'm talking to this prospect that I can sell to myself. CEO's in the room. What should I be doing? And so you need to be a bit more thoughtful about how to do it, because you want to add value to everyone, to your salesperson, to your prospect or customer. And so one of the things that was a learning is around what is value additive in this piece. And maybe some of my former life in investment banking helped, where I asked myself, if we're talking to a customer, why would I bring in a very senior banker into the room? And the answer usually is they have a perspective on something that I don't have a perspective on that might be useful to the customer. And so I'm not in the room to try and sell the client. I'm in the room to try and give them a view on something that, my salesperson or my customer success person might not have. It could be a view on product strategy. It could be a view on what other people in their industry are doing. And so it has to come from a position of, you are useful. You're not there to observe. You're not there to, help close a deal. You're not selling anything. And that became kind of a motion we created, where it also actually started with kind of an email construct, where I started going, what if I took our top 25 customers and sent their CHROs an email, what would I say in this email? I've never met many of these people because we often interact with different levels in the organization. But if somebody I haven't met would open something, what would they read? And often, executives, you have to meet them where they are. And I was like, I can't just go and say, hey, CHRO, meet me. You're already a client, because what do you say? And so we started writing these page-long emails to say, here's what's going on in your business that we understand. Here's what you're getting out of the product. Here's the value. Here's what's going on in your market. And so we started essentially creating, we called them impact memos. And the conversion we got on those was phenomenal because people would say, hey, I didn't realize this was happening. This is great. Can we talk? And so that became kind of an interesting process. And so I think being very, very intentional. And so that led us down a further path of recognizing that actually the way we interact with our customers is a significant competitive differentiator to what our competitors do. So I'll give you an example. We made a deliberate choice in implementing to date all of our clients ourselves. And, a lot of companies in our industry, they rush to do partner-driven implementation. They don't want to be services companies. And for us, the decision was around quality. It's like, we want to ensure that we deliver the quality outcome our customers deserve. Because, what we do is complex. It's, enterprise SaaS, it's AI, it's a bunch of different things. And so training a third party to do it to a degree is even harder than doing it yourself. And so one of the things that we found is that the first measure of success there is your the kind of NPS and CSAT score you get after that implementation. I think and you've been in SaaS for a long time, but what is a good implementation NPS for an enterprise SaaS company? Like, give me an or something.
A good implementation for an enterprise SaaS company. Good question. Actually, I probably wouldn't necessarily know the answer, but I'd like to say I don't know, plus 40, or if you're talking about out of 10, what a score would be.
Like the standard NPS premium, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, when you look at enterprise SaaS, like what's considered great is like 30 to 40. Like that's considered a great implementation. Yeah. If you look at kind of HR technology, it's usually negative. Like almost no one has a great implementation in HR technology. Like no one loves their ATS tools, etc. We've been averaging between 85 and 100 for the last 18 months. And you're like, wow, that's actually wild. Like how have we done that? And, I'm not kind of patting myself on the back, but I'm like, if that's the exit interaction after like what could be a 3 to 6 month process with data migration, integration, user acceptance testing, like all of these things, and you're getting like straight 9s and 10s across the board, you're doing something right.
Yep.
And so one of the things that we then started doing, and we're kind of in the middle of it right now, is saying, actually, customer experience as a competitive advantage can be true in enterprise SaaS. It's often something that, you see a lot more from, services companies, B2C companies, the quality of that experience. And I think what often happens in enterprise technology is people think a lot about the quality of products and not about the quality of the experience, whereas you can actually do both. And we started making deliberate choices about how do we do this almost as like a mini culture pivot around this needs to be what you do every day. And probably what solidified that in my head is, I don't know if you've ever read this book called Unreasonable Hospitality.
I haven't, no.
It's by this guy called Will Guidara, who was one of the two folks in charge of a restaurant called 11 Madison Park in New York. And it became the number one restaurant in the world. And one of the things he did when he founded it was, he said most restaurants, almost all top restaurants, become the top because of the food. And getting good at food is fickle. You need a great chef, sign of the times. And so some restaurants stay good for a year and then lose that credibility. And he said, what if we became good or the best restaurant in the world by having amazing food, but the best hospitality in the world? Is that even possible? And so he called this principle unreasonable hospitality. And there's a line that stuck with me, which is, he said, service is black and white. Hospitality is in color. It's how you make people feel. And maybe a second one to this is there is a company that I discovered that I completely didn't know about called Fastenal. And Fastenal is a business that makes nuts and bolts. Been around for 40 years. Market cap of like 40 billion plus. And they make a completely undifferentiated product, like literally nuts and bolts. Fasteners, that's where the company came from. And the founder basically said, we will build our business with one principle: growth through customer service. And it created a completely decentralized model. They have 3,700 stores around the US. Each one runs as its own business, making its own decisions. But the cultural principle became our customers will enjoy working with us so much they couldn't imagine working with anyone else because they knew they couldn't differentiate the product. Product was super commoditized. And to me, it became something that over the last 6 months, I've been thinking about a lot, because you realize that that can be true in SaaS. If you have, your product has to be good. But as you'll know, the best product doesn't necessarily win. The best outcome, the best customer experience, customer trust wins. And you get forgiven a lot for, everyone has challenges. You might get a customer outage. You might, do something where you piss a customer off. But if you've built that level of service and trust, you are forgiven a lot.
Yeah, no, I love that. And also, I'm going to get that book, Unreasonable Hospitality. I think this is something that can be very helpful to me, but also hopefully to our listeners. So quick sort of questions. I'm just conscious of time, but so we talked about you do 12 to 13 hours a day. We also talked about like scaling a business is bloody hard. Like, it's not easy. There's a lot of pain involved. And you're also at this 10-year mark. You've been running Beamery for 10 years. Often a lot of founders get tired at this 10-year mark, right? How do you define the energy, and the drive to say, okay, I'm going to be doing this for another 10 years or whatever, even just, next week, and so on. Like, what's your way?
My perspective maybe is a little bit different. So I think in any moment in time, this is going to get a little bit philosophical, but as much as we'd like, we can't retain the perspective we had before. So, for example, if you think about who you are today, how you see the world today, isn't the way you saw the world 10 years ago. And you can't force yourself to see the world the way you saw it 10 years ago, because you're a different human now. It doesn't mean it's better, it doesn't mean it's worse. And so, I think that a lot of entrepreneurs actually start businesses out of necessity. And necessity comes from two parts. Either you have to do it because you have no other option, or you feel like you have to do it because you want the idea to exist so much. And usually I feel like if those are not your two reasons, one is like you can't imagine a world without this idea, or you just have no choice, you're probably not going to make it through the grind. And for me, I think it was definitely the latter, where, I had a great job in finance, so I wasn't kind of struggling to make ends meet. But I felt so strongly about this, needing to exist in the world, that was the core driving force. That hasn't changed whatsoever. And I feel like actually we're getting closer and closer, but we knew it would be a very long journey, because, you're trying to build something truly meaningful. But the second piece is, forgetting that what you're actually building is, we're running a business that is well-funded, has great customers, has amazing employees, and we're building exciting new things with all the technology available. I think most people wait their entire career to be in this position. Most people, I'm convinced the large majority of people would dream about being in a situation that I'm in now. And I'm so grateful. Every day I'm grateful. And so I see every day I'm doing this job as a lucky opportunity to learn something. For me, I think that every year, whether it's ups, whether it's downs, and, we've been through the rigor. Like, we've had crazy years of growth. We've had slower growth. We've had to do cost cuts. You've had amazing investor meetings. You have, critical customers leave you. And so I think all of this kind of ride means that, what was that phrase? Smooth seas don't make a good sailor, right? And I feel like it's an opportunity every day to see how good you can become as a leader, how good you can become as a CEO. And I don't know if you read Andy Grove's book, and he talks about how people get promoted when they're competent, and then they stop being promoted, and that's their incompetence frontier. And for me, it's almost like where is my incompetence frontier? Like, how far can I go, and how much can I learn? And I think being able to build a great business is part of it, but also being able to become a great executive, a great CEO, and seeing how far I can go. So I'm not tired in the slightest. Actually, I'm very much looking forward to the next decade.
Amazing. Do you know, I'm not going to ask that next question because I think this is the perfect ending to the podcast. Like, Abakar, if people want to reach out to you, where's the best place to find you online if they've got any questions about the podcast, about yourself or Beamery?
I probably pretty much only use LinkedIn from a social media perspective. So please find me on LinkedIn. I try and not be on other social media platforms.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking your time today and sharing with the SaaStock community. Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, thank you so much. Abakar Saidov, CEO of Beamery.